digitaljamsessions.com.
Today we are joined by Imri from Bossa Studios, Paul from Strip Media, and Zoe from Software UK. Guys, welcome to Digital Jam. Welcome to the chaos that is Digital Jam.
Hello, everyone. hello. Sorry.
Yeah, we're going to work on that. Okay, so the reason I have these three lovely people in the room, on Skype at least, is so that we can talk about all things digital, and especially the emergence of digital content that crosses platforms. We're going to be talking cross-platform today. But before we leap into this conversation, very, very quickly, I would like for you lovely people to explain to our wonderful listeners exactly who you are and what you do, starting with the lovely Zoe.
I love it. It's like a kind of roulette, isn't it? Who will have to explain themselves first? So, hello, I'm Zoe. I do all kinds of different things. So I'll try and give you the short version, but maybe it's also relevant in terms of talking about how digital is going across all of our lives now in so many different areas. So I started straight out of university as a coder with software technology, where I still work. And then because when I started, we were a really small company, I basically moved around and did loads of different jobs as well as being a coder. And then in 2012, I was appointed as MD, which is what I do now. Outside of software, I've done all kinds of different things. I hosted a radio show for unsigned bands, and we use the digital platform Mixcloud to share that out afterwards. And in fact, a lot of local and community radio is now being really empowered through technology in a way that things have become so much cheaper to make. I do presenting and hosting, again on videos, and video has obviously exploded recently. And finally, I'm retraining as an actor in a slightly
because you're multi-talented, Zoe. You're multi-talented. That's why.
I'm multi-explorative, perhaps.
Okay, and Paul, why don't you explain to us all about what Strip Media is all about?
Right. So I should probably start by saying we're actually called Stripe.
I've done it again. Oh no! I'm so sorry
about that. That's quite all right. So Stripe Media is we're an independent production company, and we like to say we make films for business. So I suppose in the old money we would be what you call a corporate film company, but we really don't like using that term because so much of what we do doesn't fit into the sort of traditional image of what being corporate film actually is. And I think, as Zoe's just said, film has kind of exploded. Film, video, online video has absolutely exploded in the last 5 years or so, or maybe slightly longer than that. And we cover sort of the full gamut of it, really. I mean, my expertise generally is as a producer and director. But because we're a small company, I tend to do a little bit of everything. So that's everything from script development, treatment ideas, and I also do a fair bit of post-production as well. We cover such a wide range of things. It's hard to really sort of put it in a bracket, I guess. But to give you an example, I've just finished making a film for the London Legacy Development Corporation about the Olympic Park and apprentices working on the Olympic Park. And I've gone straight from that into pre-production on a series of video blogs about sex toys. So it's quite a wide range of things that we do.
Diverse, perhaps?
Absolutely. Yes, diverse is the word. Absolutely.
Okay, and Imri, please explain to those of us who are not gamers or in the gaming world, what is Bossa Studios?
Hi, Bossa Studios is a fairly young studio. We're 4 years old, and we make video games and all sorts and all kind of video games. We are probably most known 2 comedy games we did, one called Surgeon Simulator and the other I Am Bread, which is as silly as it sounds based on the title, because you are playing the role of a slice of bread. Besides
no
being...
comment.
Besides being a founder of Bossa Studios, I am also quite active in various support functions in getting youngsters into STEM education in general, and in particular, I am committee member of BAFTA Games.
Okay, so you've all told me officially what you do, but now I'm going to lift the lid and I'm going to tell our listeners about what you also do underneath all of that, which actually is the reason why you're all connected in some vague and loose way. First of all, I'm going to reveal that Imre is also a mentor at Playhubs, the UK, well, London's first dedicated games incubator based at Somerset House. We are mentors together. That is why I know Imre. Paul is also a trustee at UN Influx. You failed to mention this, Paul.
I do apologise.
which is a non-profit working towards a digitised UN and communications for the United Nations to the general public in digital ways. I had the pleasure of being a judge for the UN Hackathon, UN Influx Hackathon, which is how I know Paul. And Zoe, amongst all those other things that she said she did, she forgot to mention she is also a member of London Girl Geek Dinners, which is a wonderful organisation. Specifically, they're for women in tech and in Cody-related type roles, and a networking organisation for women. And we are both members of that group. So that's how we all know each other. So everybody's clear.
Hooray. I told you it's the short version of my bio.
Just in case anybody's wondering, how on earth did we get this random mix of people together? Now you know. So let's talk cross-media. Let's talk about this emergence of digital content that's crossing over different platforms. And the reason that I find this topic particularly fascinating and interesting is because I feel like there's this really interesting grey space where we have a film industry that is trying to become more interactive in the way that they tell their stories, and they're looking for more and more integrated media, transmedia, digital ways of expressing their stories. On the flip side of that, you have this traditional console games industry that is becoming more and more linear in the way that they tell their stories. We look at things like The Last of Us, or the most recent Lara Croft Tomb Raider release, and these cutscenes are so cinematic in the way that they are expressing the story that we're literally having a cinematic experience within the game. So I think that there is this very interesting middle ground between these industries where there is new and different ways to articulate story. And we're finding more and more emergence of these kind of, ARG or, integrated media or transmedia style campaigns, which really look at having, borderless storytelling. And that's where this really comes from, this conversation really comes from. But I'd be very interested to hear this stance certainly from your point of view, Imre, from a games perspective. How much do you think the games industry really has shifted into this notion that it's not all about the actual game content itself, but also about where the content can be shared in other places?
Wow, that is a huge topic. I'm just going to give you a really quick a look on this. I mean, firstly, what you said is true. The production values of what we call AAA games are hugely different to what they were, let's say, 20 years ago. We are talking about game budgets easily 100 million plus, some reaching $500 million to make. And of course, when you reach that level, then suddenly the amount of talent and amount of production which get involved is, by definition, will mean that we are bringing in talent from non-interactive storytelling. And that is quite wonderful because there is this huge talent. There is this 100 years long know-how of filmmaking, and I'm not just talking about writing and directing, but costume design to casting to you name what. And what I see increasingly that on the other side, interactive storytelling has a know-how on how to address a modern audience and how to work with that audience. And I'd like to believe that whichever film company will cleverly jump on that and adapt that first will win huge territories. I'm just going to give you one example of this, how cross-media can work in games. Imagine that when we developed a Surgeon Simulator, which is a dark physical comedy game, because obviously what's funnier than a heart transplant? So we thought it's a great topic for comedy. So when we developed that, we listened to our audience. People want to get more involved. They want to contribute more to the creation of the entertainment they use. So we listened to them. We got a lot of joke ideas from them, and then we put those jokes into the game. Then we have people who record themselves playing and then add commentary on top of that game recording. We call them Let's Players. The biggest YouTubers today are often Let's Players. So, for example, PewDiePie, who is obviously the biggest at the moment, most of his content is Let's Play videos. So what's interesting that then there is one more twist on top of that, because now one of my favorite surgeon simulator videos is actually an animated show, an animated short based on a Let's Play video, based on our game what we made, which was based on a joke we got from the audience. So suddenly you have this kind of circular people creating layers of content on top of each other, which would have been absolutely impossible, let's say 20, 30 years ago. And today it created this whole industry which feed off of each other, both financially and, more important, creatively.
It's interesting that you're talking about this collaborative creation approach, and it's something that we've spoken about on previous sessions. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, Paul, in terms of this notion of having an open door policy of collaboration with this audience to encourage fandom and encourage the creation of additional content. Do we feel that there are risks inherent with that when it comes to a specific franchise or a specific product?
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, I can see that there's an issue in terms of the curation of the content that gets created. And I mean, my experience of this sort of thing, I did a film for McDonald's last year, based around their Little Piccadilly campaign, which is what they've put up on the big screen at Piccadilly Circus. And the whole idea of it is to get members of the public who are there interacting with the screen and creating their own avatars and projecting them to the screen. And I thought that was quite an interesting way of giving a sort of sense of public engagement to the campaign, but actually it was very closely and carefully controlled by McDonald's, and you also had, you know, a kind of a delay in the period between when people created things and they went up live on the screen. So I suppose even within that limited framework, anything that they felt wasn't appropriate, I guess, could be mediated out. But from the perspective of what I do, what I've really noticed in terms of this idea of getting members of the public to create content is that I find that what a lot of my clients want to do is to create a campaign like that and then take the end result of all of that and create a more conventional case study, which they can then put out through the usual sort of channels. So by which I mean they will create it might be an experiential event, or it might be something like that, a kind of interactive advertisement or something like that, and then they will collate all of that content and put it into a more conventional format, like a film for YouTube or something to put on their website, and then that is what they drive out and push out as their main kind of piece. And that perhaps part of that is due to the risk inherent of giving the public free rein to create their own content.
So, and I don't want to offend anybody who's listening here, but are we suggesting that perhaps with public interaction comes a degradation of quality, which is kind of true of the notion of UGC or user-generated content, which is, in general, you know, it's great from a creative perspective of getting all those collaborative ideas together. But when it comes to execution, 9 times out of 10, anything that's UGC tends to be quite poor quality. YouTube is a great example of this as a whole.
I love this. Can I jump in here?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I want to champion it, really. And I think that I would call it democratization, really, that there's now an entry point into a lot of fields, whether that's film, TV, radio, gaming even. There's a kind of much lower barrier to entry in terms of the cost of recording things and the specialist skill set needed to do things. And I'm not saying that there aren't downsides in some ways, but we're also seeing a whole bunch of really new stuff happening. And actually what we're seeing from having more people able to take part is, I think we often are seeing a championing of story over technical aspects such as graphics, or, you know, if you kind of think the big Hollywood blockbuster where almost the story goes out the window and it's more about effects and so on and so on. And a great example of this for me, which is a game that I love very, very much. I think I found it just through a list of the most downloaded games, right? Which shows that now you can become popular without a marketing budget. You just need to be good and people pick you up. But there's a game called A Dark Room. I don't know if other people have played this.
I am aware of it. I haven't played it because I'm not into that genre, but I have heard of it.
Well, I don't know if I would say that I was into that genre either, but it was just quite a cute and engaging little game. And so to use your brain to solve puzzles, essentially, while not having having absolute minimal graphics overlaid on top of it, I thought that was a really awesome little game.
Well, this brings me to another interesting question, actually, which is, do we think that perhaps the general mainstream consuming public have become a little bit too dependent on pretty special effects and big old graphics and whatnot, in as much as it is quite difficult sometimes to just have something be there on the merit of its own worth in terms of content. If it doesn't have the big glitzy, special effects or the big glitzy talent in it, it can be hard for, certainly an independent film to really get the recognition it deserves. Likewise with gaming, if it doesn't have something pretty and sleek about it, that sometimes these games can be overlooked. Do we think that there is maybe a dependence for the mainstream public, that they do need things to kind of be a bit spoon-fed to them from a visual language perspective?
If I may add something here, potentially controversial, I think that the dependence on huge production is not created by the audience. It is created and advertised by the big studios, because it is really scary for them to realize that someone from the street can come in and beat them in their own game. And obviously, the way to do that is to raise the minimum amount of budget needed to make a film, for example. But two things which I think is worth noting here. One, that there is a reason why PewDiePie has 35 million subscribers. It is not by chance. It is that the audience wants that type of entertainment, and therefore that type of entertainment is created and being served for them. So I wouldn't underplay the fact that maybe his videos are not costing that much, not even the per minute cost of, let's say, compared to BBC One talk show, for example. But the fact is that it works. And more importantly, especially with the games, there is this huge movement of independent game creation, which is absolutely wonderful. There are amazing success stories, and I know everyone loves a rags to riches story, but there is a game, for example, called Thomas Was Alone, which is widely agreed to be a gripping, wonderful storytelling, whilst at the same time its visuals to the casual observer might appear to be primitive. So it's worth noting that these games go out and become very, very successful. And I wish I would say the same with film, for example. I wish that there would be an independent culture where it is reasonably possible for an individual or 3-4 people to band together, create the film, distribute that film, and make enough money out of that. Then afterwards they can fund their next film. This is something that, even though difficult, completely possible within gaming, and I hope that we are going to see this with films as well.
So that leads me then to the next question, which is crowdfunding is obviously a way of being able to fund these smaller individual projects and allow these people who don't necessarily have the big budgets as the studios have, or big distribution models, to actually have a go. And we've seen some really interesting, projects come through Kickstarter campaigns or Indiegogo campaigns. And, from a games industry perspective, we look at things like, Ouya, or we look at, GameStick. And, if you're looking at the really big examples, things like Star Citizen. I think that there's definitely an interesting opportunity here for people to, as you might say, have a go, so to speak. What's our take on crowdfunding as a medium and a mechanism to encourage this independent movement?
Well, I'm quite interested to talk about film in this regard, because it's something that I've been learning more about. So I'm kind of new to it. So I'm kind of going in as someone without a background in film, finding out how it's all set out. And I suppose the first thing I've noticed is that while film is a lot cheaper, it's still not always, there are a lot of costs costs you incur in film, particularly for me coming from radio, where radio is actually, it's very feasible. You can do it on your own. You can record yourself, edit yourself, and do everything yourself. Similarly, a kind of video blog, you can also take complete control of that yourself. Whereas a film, you actually have a lot of different things you need to source in order to make a film. And even making a short isn't necessarily, super cheap. However, having said that, there are still over 100,000 short films being made every year, and the viewing public just kind of isn't there for short films. And making a feature film is a whole new ballgame, and even crowdfunding enough to make a feature film is quite a big challenge. And I don't know if that matches with everyone else's findings in this world.
What's your take on this, Paul?
Yeah, I have to say I'd absolutely agree. There is a limit to what you can do on a very small budget in a filmmaking realm. Then you've got this separate issue, as you say, as Imre's talked about of distribution. I mean, I think there is some sort of light at the end of the tunnel for that in terms of the success of people on things like YouTube, and I've also with Vimeo, which is is a kind of slightly more sort of elevated video platform, I suppose, from the filmmaker's perspective. And they've actually started producing their own series. It's not necessarily relevant from a budget point of view, but in terms of, it's a thing called High Maintenance, which I don't know if any of you are aware of, but it's a comedy series that they've actually produced themselves, and they're trying to actually compete now with TV channels using Vimeo as a platform. But they have the advantage of being able to use their very large user base to advertise to. And I think that's where one of the big problems comes. Even if you've got to the point where you've actually created your product, getting it out there is not so straightforward. I was going to sort of jump back slightly, just talking about this. I suppose it crosses the two, just thinking about this idea of story and about budget and everything. I do think that whilst the pyrotechnics and the having a high production value is important, story or content, to look at it from a kind of a video point of view, is also hugely important. And an example I'd cite of this is GoPro. I'm sure you're all familiar with GoPro cameras, small HD video cameras that are largely used for things like adventure sports. And they have created an enormous platform for themselves just through having amazing content. Now, the production value of their films is actually very simple and very low. The cameras, you literally press start and stop. There's no, until recently, there wasn't even a way of viewing what you were filming while you were filming it. And what they did was they just had such fantastic content throughout, by just getting all the people who are doing the most extraordinary and outrageous things in the worlds of extreme sports to use their cameras and to create amazing content and to build an enormous following through that. So actually what you've got there is you've got quite low production value filmmaking going to a huge audience. And I actually saw the whole thing crossing over into the new realm last week. Quite interesting, and what we're talking about in terms of big films is that Fast and Furious 7 have just let GoPro shoot behind the scenes footage of the making of their latest sequel, showing them throwing cars out the back of a plane at sort of 20,000 feet and having parachuters jump after them, filming with GoPros. And they're actually put that out as a piece of content for GoPro, but obviously it's a fantastic piece of trailer for Fast and Furious 7, which comes out, I think, this week in the UK. And it's almost like the whole thing going full circle, using low production value film to promote high production value. And I thought it was very interesting.
Actually, adding on to what Paul was saying there, I think a really good example of this kind of low budget filmmaking and kind of aspirational filmmaking being kind of recognised by the bigger brand. A really good example and case study of this is actually Devin Supertramp, YouTube millionaire, who made his kind of big break was actually taking the next step up from GoPro and using Steadicam to record a lot of his kind of very extreme sports that he's into, but very specifically he's a fan of parkour, which is, when we see people flinging themselves off buildings and what have you, and kind of leaping about all over the place like little, monkeys off buildings. And he combined that with Assassin's Creed, which is hugely popular franchise. and he did a live action version of Assassin's Creed using parkour experts. So they were running around his hometown, leaping off things, crawling over things, and all that kind of thing. And the video absolutely took off. It had millions and millions of views, enough so that the marketing team recognised the opportunity. And that's, I think, the rare thing here is for the brand or the franchise or the studio in question to actually recognise the opportunity. And what they did was they actually struck a deal with Devin Supertramp and his team, and actually had him come to Comic-Con in San Diego the following year for the release of the next Assassin's Creed game. I think it was Assassin's Creed 3, potentially 4, I can't remember which one now, where they were having a big launch party on a pirate ship, and they actually gave him full access to come and shoot some footage on the ship, but to again create another video that of parkour running around San Diego Comic-Con and what have you. Gave him access to the music and the license for the music, etc. And he went on to continue to create content, and that's been very much a launch pad for him in terms of allowing him to have a quantifiable career doing these kind of videos, which I think is a really good example of the kind of thing that Paul was referring to.
So I think something which was very important mentioned just now about the distribution platforms, and I think between understanding your audience and understanding your distribution platforms, you can create new content. The challenges and the trouble is when we go in and we are going to try to tell people that we know better than they do what they want. And secondly, when we just ignore the characteristics of these new modern platforms, and then we insist that no, I will tell my story in a 90 minutes episode or a 24 half an hour commercial half an hour episode, and I just insist on that. That is the problem. But distribution makes such a huge difference. The reason gaming broke out is because between Valve's Steam digital distribution platform and of course Apple's App Store, between those two places, basically an average person can create something which is a financially viable project, so to speak. So I think it's great that Vimeo and even YouTube trying to do their own content, but I think we're still missing an important step when it comes to video content before we can break through and we can see the same independent creation what we have at games.
And very, very briefly, before we finish, I'm going to ask each of you to shout out your relevant Twitter handle, pretty please. Zoe.
Zoe F. Cunningham.
Paul.
Stripe Media.
Imre.
At Imre Jele.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate you joining us today, and thank you for listening to Digital Jam Sessions. And remember, if you want to catch any of these lovely people, you can just follow them on their relevant Twitter handles. Subscribe today at digitaljamsessions.com. digitaljamsessions.com